Ever get chills watching those spy movies where someone gets taken out with a super secretive poison?
Turns out real life can be even wilder.
Today, we're diving into the world of Novichok nerve agents, stuff that seems ripped straight from a scriptwriter's wildest imagination, but it's very, very real.
And these aren't relics of the past either.
We tend to think of chemical weapons in a historical context, but Novichok represents a much more modern and arguably more terrifying chapter in the story of these weapons. Okay, so before we get into all that, what exactly are Novichok agents?
We've got excerpts from Wikipedia to guide us, so you know we're starting with a solid neutral foundation.
Yeah.
Good call. Wikipedia is all about that balanced perspective.
So, in a nutshell, Novichok agents are a family of nerve agents developed by the Soviet Union, later Russia. And when we say potent, some experts believe certain variants are 5 to 8 times deadlier than VX. Hold on. For those of us who aren't chemical weapons experts, VX was already considered one of the most dangerous nerve agents out there, right?
So we're talking next level stuff here.
Absolutely. What makes Novichok even more unnerving is how difficult it is to detect.
They designed these agents specifically to be undetectable by the standard equipment NATO was using back in the 70s and 80s.
So if I'm understanding this right, the Soviets were basically trying to create a weapon that could bypass all existing treaties and detection methods.
Talk about a high-stakes game of chess, exactly.
And it gets more complicated. We're not just talking about a gas here.
Novichok agents can be solid, liquid. The solid form can even be dispersed as an ultrafine powder.
Imagine something invisible, odorless, potentially deadly in incredibly small doses. That's a lot to take in.
Invisible, undetectable, and potentially deadly.
It's starting to feel like one of those movies where the hero barely survives a brush with a mysterious substance.
And sadly, in the real world, not everyone survives.
There have been a number of high-profile poisoning cases using Novichok.
Each one reveals a little more about the chilling reach of these agents.
Like the 2018 poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in England.
That one made headlines everywhere. It really did.
Skripal, a former Russian intelligence officer, and his daughter were found unconscious on a park bench. The UK government directly accused Russia of orchestrating the attack, which, as you can imagine, caused a huge international incident, not to mention a diplomatic nightmare. It sounds like something straight out of a spy thriller, but the ramifications were very real.
What stood out to me about that case was the sheer audacity of it, using a nerve agent on foreign soil, against someone who used to work for your own intelligence services. It speaks to a level of daring and perhaps desperation that's hard to fully comprehend.
And the Skripal case, as shocking as it was, isn't the only one.
In fact, just a few months later, another poisoning occurred in Amesbury, England, not far from where the Skripals were attacked.
This is what gets me. It's not just limited to these high-profile targets.
This time it involved civilians, right?
What happened there?
It was a terrifying example of how indiscriminate these weapons can be.
A couple, Charlie Rowley and Don Sturgis, came into contact with what's believed to be a discarded container related to the Skripal attack. Wait, so we're talking something as simple as picking up a discarded bottle and suddenly you're exposed to a deadly nerve agent.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
It really highlights the invisible threat these agents pose, how something seemingly harmless can turn deadly in an instant.
And tragically, Don Sturgis passed away after being exposed to the Novichok agent. It's a stark reminder that these aren't just abstract threats.
They have real devastating consequences for innocent people.
Absolutely. And the Amesbury case underscores just how vulnerable we can be to these kinds of agents. So we've seen Novichok used against a former spy and tragically against civilians who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It doesn't end there.
In 2020, Alexei Navalny, a prominent Russian opposition leader, became violently ill during a flight.
He was eventually evacuated to Germany for treatment.
That one sent shockwaves through the international community, didn't it?
I remember it being all over the news. It was a major story.
Subsequent tests confirmed that Navalny had been poisoned with a Novichok agent, making it abundantly clear that this wasn't just a rogue operation. Targeting someone of Navalny's stature, knowing the world would be watching. It feels like a whole different level of brazen.
It really does.
This case in particular demonstrates the audacity and reach of those behind these attacks, their willingness to operate on a global stage with seeming impunity. It's all starting to feel very unsettling, to be honest.
But before we spiral into full-on spy thriller mode, I think it's important to understand the science behind all of this.
Agreed. Understanding the mechanics of how these agents work can make it all the more real and all the more concerning. So we've thrown around the term nerve agent a lot.
What does that actually mean?
How does Novichok affect the human body?
Well, To put it simply, Novichok agents belong to a class of substances called organophosphates.
These compounds work by disrupting the nervous system, which, as you can imagine, is bad news. Okay, so not good.
But how exactly does that disruption work?
Our nervous system is basically our body's electrical grid, right?
What's happening there? You've got it.
Think of your nervous system like a complex network of signals that control every single thing your body does: breathing, moving, thinking, even your heartbeat.
Novichok agents disrupt those signals, essentially short-circuiting the entire system.
So what does that look like in a person who's been exposed?
The symptoms can be terrifying, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking constricted pupils, vomiting, difficulty breathing, convulsions. The list goes on.
And if left untreated, it ultimately leads to death from respiratory and heart failure. So even if the initial exposure isn't fatal, it leaves its victims with a life sentence of suffering.
Sadly, that's often the case.
Lasting nerve damage is a common consequence of Novichok poisoning. We're talking about chronic health issues, a constant reminder of the attack.
It's a horrific thought.
It really is. It's like something out of a nightmare, knowing that even if you survive, the poison leaves its mark on you forever. This is heavy stuff. So knowing all of this, what can be done?
How do you even begin to treat Novichok poisoning? Well, the first line of defense is recognizing the symptoms early.
Time is absolutely critical when it comes to treating Novichok poisoning.
Antidotes, like atropine, can be effective, but only if administered quickly and correctly.
So it's a race against time.
And even then, there's no guarantee.
Exactly. And the administration of antidotes is a delicate balance in itself.
Too little, and it might not be effective.
Too much, and the patient risks serious side effects. It's a high-stakes situation, to say the least. It sounds incredibly complex.
And from what I understand, even detecting Novichok in the first place is a challenge.
These agents are notoriously difficult to identify, right?
You're right.
They were designed that way, remember?
To be as undetectable as possible.
And to make matters even more difficult, these agents are incredibly stable.
We're talking potentially remaining potent for decades.
Decades?
You're kidding.
So even if a site is contaminated, it's not like the threat just disappears overnight.
Not at all.
It's like dealing with a poison that has an incredibly long shelf life.
This makes cleanup efforts incredibly difficult and dangerous.
It's a problem that can span generations. This is all so unsettling, but it's important to talk about it, right?
To shed light on these terrifying weapons that exist in the shadows, absolutely.
Knowledge is power, and understanding the threat posed by Novichok is the first step in advocating for its elimination and preventing future tragedies. I completely agree.
The more we know, the better equipped we are to demand change, to push for stricter regulations, and to hold those responsible accountable. And it's not just about governments and international organizations.
Individuals can make a difference too. What do you mean?
Like raising awareness, educating others about the dangers. Exactly.
And speaking up against the development and use of chemical weapons in any form.
But it goes even deeper than that.
There's a story, a true story, that I think really exemplifies individual courage in the face of something like the Novichok program.
Oh.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So there was this Russian scientist, Vilmizyanov.
In the early 1990s, he took an incredible risk.
He blew the whistle on the entire Novichok program.
He put his own safety on the line to expose this program.
What?
What drove him to do that?
Mirzyanov was driven by a deep sense of moral obligation. He knew the horrors these agents could unleash, and he couldn't stay silent.
But his concerns weren't just about the immediate danger of Novichok being used as a weapon.
What else was he worried about? Mirzyanov was horrified by the potential for environmental catastrophe.
He knew the production process for Novichok was incredibly toxic, and he feared long-term contamination of water sources and the environment. So he was thinking about the long-term consequences, the impact this program could have for generations to come.
Precisely.
He was a true visionary, willing to risk his own well-being to protect others and the planet.
Wow.
Now,
Talk about courage.
what happened to him after he blew the whistle? He faced immediate backlash, of course.
Arrested, accused of treason.
Yeah.
But his actions, they started a ripple effect. They brought international attention to the Novichok program, a program that Russia had denied even existed for years.
So one man's bravery, his willingness to speak truth to power, helped to shine a light on one of the most dangerous secrets of our time.
Exactly.
His story is a testament to the power of individual action.
It's a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, one person can make a difference.
It's incredible to think that one person's actions could have such a ripple effect.
Mirzyanov's story is a powerful reminder that We all have a role to play in speaking out against injustice and fighting for a safer world.
Absolutely.
Silence only benefits those who operate in the shadows.
But speaking of shadows, Mirzayanov's whistleblowing, while incredibly important, didn't magically erase the threat of Novichok.
Right.
Even with the world watching, we've still seen these horrifying poisonings take place.
So where does that leave us?
What are we supposed to do with all of this information, this unsettling feeling that something so terrifying exists in the world?
It's a heavy question.
No doubt.
For me,
It underscores the urgent need for international cooperation.
Yeah.
The development and use of Novichok agents represents a dangerous escalation in chemical warfare, and it demands a united response from the global community.
and that response needs to go beyond just words.
Right.
We need action, concrete steps to prevent the proliferation of these agents and to hold those responsible accountable.
We've seen the devastating consequences of inaction.
We need to be actively engaged in pushing for stronger arms control agreements, for transparency in chemical weapons programs, and for justice for the victims of these horrific attacks.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, even powerless, when faced with something as daunting as chemical weapons.
But stories like Mirzayanov's remind us that individuals can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Knowledge is power, but it's only meaningful when we use it to advocate for change. By staying informed, raising awareness, and demanding better from our leaders, we can create a safer world for everyone.
This deep dive has been a wild ride.
We've gone from the shadowy world of espionage to the complexities of nerve agents to the very real human cost of these weapons.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. But I think the most important takeaway is this: the threat is real, but so is our ability to fight back.
By working together, by demanding accountability, and by refusing to be silenced, we can make a difference.
The future, as always, is in our hands.